What's up everybody, it's Izzy, and in this video I'm going to talk about elbow and shoulder pain from low bar squats. Now keep in mind that this could easily be like a 45-minute video, but I'm going to try to give you guys the Cliff Notes version. I'm going to break this down into several categories. 1 is mobility, 2 is technique, 3 is programming, 4 is going to be prehab, and 5 is going to be rehab. Okay, but first let's understand what causes this. There's really 2 competing theories, and I think it's actually a little bit of both. One is that there is simply inherent loading of the shoulders and elbows and wrists in a low bar squat due to the bar position. When you're doing a lot of reps, the bar is going to move around a little bit, and at various times, the entire load is not being carried by your back. Okay, some of that is getting absorbed by the wrists, shoulders, elbows, etc. Okay, and then the other competing theory, which again I think is also true, is that when you jam yourself into position on a low bar squat, or even if you just get into position, there's going to be certain mobility demands throughout the upper body, okay? On your lats and your ability to extend your thoracic spine in general, in your chest, in terms of getting your elbows back, and your shoulders, same thing with your internal and external rotation. And if you lack the requisite mobility to get into the position that you're jamming yourself in, or the position that you're trying to maintain under load, what can happen is that your actual tendons can compensate by mobilizing. So a lot of people don't know this, is that your tendons do have an ability to a certain degree to mobilize a little bit. So if you're lacking enough mobility throughout, the upper body, and it could be a number of things, chest, lats, the shoulders, there's numerous potential causes. But if you're lacking in any one of those areas, your shoulder can mobilize further, the shoulder joint, everything that's going on in the shoulder. The bicep tendon is one that happens a lot, and it can rotate and move around. And that's going to cause things inside of that structure to rub and become irritated as it's being loaded through a position that it's really not even meant to hold. Okay? And with increased exposure to the irritant, which would be low bar squats, right? This lack of mobility only enhances the rate at which these structures are irritated and inflamed. So the lack of mobility will enhance the rate at which somebody who would be prone to this problem will get it and have it develop. So again, I think it's a bit of both. To a certain degree, there's a bit of inherent loading on the wrists and elbows when you low bar squat. Your back doesn't quite carry all of it. And it's even more true that a poor mobility can lead to these issues accumulating and presenting themselves much, much faster. So like I said, the first way that we have to address this is through mobility, and it's a 2-pronged approach. One is increasing mobility, but the other is reducing the mobility requirements of the movement itself. So to increase mobility here, you need to identify what the problem is, and like I said, the 3 most common ones are the lats and your general ability to extend at the thoracic spine, your chest, and your shoulders, internal and external rotation. Okay, so make sure that those 3 things are good. Some things that you can do there are band or PVC pipe dislocations. That's probably my favorite one. The most specific stretch that you could do is simply put your hands where they would go for your low bar squat and lean underneath the bar, slowly stretching that out. Okay, that's another great one. But probably the easier way to do this, even though of course I recommend working on your mobility at the same time, is to reduce the mobility requirements of the movement. One way to do this, as you're seeing in the video, is to use a different bar. So with the Duffalo bar, because the bar is going to sit lower, I don't have to get my elbows as far back. It doesn't require quite as much mobility through the shoulders and upper body, okay? And that's why for a lot of people it eases this pain, because if they have a mobility issue, the bar reduces the mobility requirements and thus removes one of the biggest sources of irritation to that ligament or tendon that's being inflamed. But there's other things that you can do even with a straight bar. So one is to just move your grip width out. The wider your grip, generally the less mobility requirements that there are going to be in the chest and shoulders and lats, okay? The next one that you can do is to bend your wrists. You can either do this by putting your thumb around the bar and letting your wrist bend, but you could also bend your wrists even with your thumbs on top of the bar. What's more important is that you let the wrists bend, because when your wrists bend, you don't need quite as much mobility, again, throughout the upper body. It reduces those mobility requirements. You can see this for yourself, all right? Now, if you're going to do that, make sure that you wear wrist wraps, and that kind of has the double benefit of some of the load is absorbed by the wrist wrap. So like those people that believe that low bar inherently loads some of those tendons and ligaments, well, when you use a bent wrist grip with wrist wraps, the wrist wraps will absorb a lot of that and thus reduce the overall load that's being placed on those structures, which over time can reduce the rate at which you get this inflammation problem or potentially, help you not get it at all. So mobility, you either improve your mobility or you reduce the mobility requirements of the movement. All right, second is technique. All right, so one thing here is that if you carry the bar extra low, say below the rear delts, I don't think there's any way to do that without being extremely bent over and without loading the structures that we're talking about here. So first thing that you can do is just carry the bar higher. And this is one big reason why high bar causes less issues here. Not only does high bar reduce the mobility requirements by moving the bar up higher, but it also makes sure that the traps take on most of the load of the bar. And so you're not stressing the tendons and ligaments of your elbows and shoulders as much. Okay? So make sure that you're not trying to carry the bar too low. Chalk your back to make sure the bar is not sliding down your back during your sets. Carrying the bar just a little bit higher can make a huge difference on this one. The third thing that I said we'd talk about is programming. So again, let me remind you that because this is an overuse injury, it is a chronic inflammation problem, the more often that you introduce the irritant, the more likely you are going to remain chronically inflamed. So one of the first things that you can do programmatically to help address this issue is simply do less low bar squats. Do them less frequently. Okay? You can improve your mobility, you can reduce the mobility requirements, but if that's not enough to eliminate the problem, do less low bar squats, right? It's pretty simple. Do it less often, get that structure irritated less often, and inflammation will have more time to die down. So you can do this by simply squatting less often, or you can use variations that are either easier on the elbows and shoulders or which completely remove any of that loading. So one good example would be safety bar squats, right? You don't really, the pad in your upper back takes all of the load. So you don't have to worry as much about your elbows and shoulders and the mobility demands there. Duffalo bars are another great one, as you're seeing here. High bar squats is another option. Okay, keep in mind with some of these things that once it gets bad enough, even these will irritate it. But I'll address that later on. But again, programmatically, simply do less low bar squats. It's totally fine. Okay, introduce that element less often, and you'll have the problem less often. The next issue that I want to talk about is prehab. So the biggest thing that can help with tendon overuse injuries, in my experience, is controlled eccentric work. Okay, so load the tendons and structures that have this inflammation and load them eccentrically. So the biggest one that makes the biggest difference for so many of us out here is hammer curls. Dumbbell hammer curls with a controlled eccentric are going to make your elbows feel a lot better. And I do them all the time. I do it once or twice a week, all the time, pretty much year round, because it helps this problem not come up as often. And when you do get this problem, it provides instant relief. High rep, controlled, eccentric work is something that you can do for any tendon issue for the most part. And it's really no different with the elbow pain that you get from low bar squats. Hammer curls are critical and help a lot. So the last area to address here would be rehab, okay? And again, I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. I'm just telling you my experience and what has worked for me. If you are seriously hurt, seek out a competent professional. Like I said, this is not a replacement for a professional's advice. All right, so with that said, with the rehab aspect, this is an overuse injury. You cannot train through it. This is the biggest mistake that people make is they try to go back to benching. They try to go back to low bar squats. They even try to do high bar squats or Duffalo bar squats. But once this problem is bad enough, I'm speaking from personal experience, there's almost nothing, no variations that you can do. There's no way to load that arm without it hurting and getting worse. So at this point, you simply have to take time off from anything that loads that ligament or tendon. And I've had it bad enough where I couldn't even deadlift, and my arm is straight in a deadlift, right? So if it's bad enough, you have to completely take time off. There's just no way around that. Again, here's another thing that I've done as far as rehab goes. If you have a meet or a contest coming up, one thing that I've personally done, this is not medical advice again, is remember, tendinitis is an inflammation problem. So you can take NSAIDs, so you can take anti-inflammatories such as ibuprofen, to help get the inflammation down. So a protocol that I've used is 800 milligrams of ibuprofen 4 times a day for 5 days. Don't do it longer than that because it can elevate your liver enzymes, and obviously overall it's not healthy, and you don't want to rely on ibuprofen in order to be able to train effectively. But in a situation where this issue has flared up really badly and you need to get it under control fast so that you can get back to meat prep or whatever it is that you're doing, a short burst of high dose anti-inflammatories can make a huge difference, okay? But again, you have to remove the irritants. You cannot try to train through this injury. It's imperative that you guys understand that. You can't try to train through it. You need to rest. And then when you're finally getting better, don't immediately jump back into high frequency low bar squatting. Use variations that are not as difficult mobility wise, and make sure that it heals, okay? There's nothing else you can do. All right, guys, overall, that's all I have to say about this. So I'll quickly recap. Mobility-wise, improve your overall upper body mobility through the chest, shoulders, lats, general ability to extend the thoracic spine. Reduce the mobility requirements by potentially widening your grip and squatting with a bent wrist grip with wrist wraps. Second thing you can do, obviously, is technique. Do not carry the bar too low. Just carry it a little bit higher. It'll make a big difference. Third, programmatically, do not do low bar squats too often. If it gets bad enough, don't do low bar squats at all. All right, don't introduce the irritant more often. Fourth, prehab. Stretch, do your mobility. Shoulder dislocations are great, but the big one that I would recommend to you is eccentric loading. And I personally do that with DB hammer curls, and they make all the difference in the world. It's awesome, okay? They provide instant relief. They prevent the issue from happening in the first place for me as well. Lastly, as far as rehab goes, you cannot train through this injury. You cannot train through this injury, right? And if worse comes to worse, you can do a short burst of high dose ibuprofen or another anti-inflammatory to help get the swelling down if you have to get ready for a contest on some sort of a timeline. But otherwise, let it heal on its own, and that's all you can do. You have to rest. All right, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. As always, my friends, have a nice day and good luck with your training. Peace.